Today you will learn about the African Americans in the Civil War.
Significant details about African Americans during the Civil War was that Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation that stated that all men, including African Americans, should be free, and this allowed African Americans to become a part of the Civil War. The first engagement with African Americans was with Kansas at Island Mound in October 1862.
The Union Army was an army that did fight in the Civil War, of course. Um, at the beginning of the Civil War, black men or African Americans are not allowed to enlist because of a law passed in 1792 which banned them from bearing arms in the U.S. Army. They were also now not allowed to enlist because President Lincoln feared of border states succeeding, such as Missouri. Finally, in 1862, African Americans were finally allowed to enlist because of the Second Confiscation and Militia Act. You will need to know that the Second Confiscation and Militia Act was which freed slaves who had mastered in the Confederate Army and the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Confederate Army was another army that fought in the Civil War. Um, Most black men were in the slave labor force, and during the Civil War, some slaves were brought with their master to tend to their master's camps um, while their master was fighting during the Civil War. If their master was killed during the Civil War, the slaves were to return to their family, but some slaves did end up taking up their master's position on the firing line. You need to know that midway into the war, in about 1863, there were more Confederate soldiers that were needed, and militias of free black men were offered to the Confederates, but they were refused. Um, you also need to know that as the war went on, it became an issue in the Confederate Congress. In 1864, army service was proposed, but it was denied by the president of the Confederacy, who was Jefferson Davis. Um, in March 1865, on March 13th, the legislation passed that would free black slaves if they enlisted in the Confederate Army, but they first had to get permission from their masters. About 50 or less black soldiers were enlisted because of legislation, and because they were still in training war-handed, which did not allow them much time to fight because they had not received proper training. Roles of African Americans in the Civil War. Since they cannot fight during the Civil War, they did serve in other positions such as nurses and cooks and blacksmiths. At the time, the South would not arm them, but they did use the African Americans to build them forts and take care of the camp duties where they were away fighting during the Civil War. African Americans were also assigned to non-combat duties, and they did guard the railroads and bridges. You will need to know about African Americans who served as spies and or scouts for the Union Army, and they were known as the Black Dispatches. You also need to know what the Black Dispatchers are, which is a special category for those African Americans who served as spies and provided valuable information about the Confederate forces' plans and terrain to return back to the Union Army. Um, you also need to know about the treatment of their African American men in the Civil War. Of course, they did not receive equal pay or treatment as the white soldiers did. Um, they did receive $10 a month, which did go down to $7 because their pay was deducted $3 because of their clothing. In comparison to the white soldiers who received $13 a month because they did not receive any deductions for clothing or food or anything. Um, but eventually, in June of 1864, Congress did grant equal pay towards the white and black soldiers. You will need to know that the segregated units were formed with black men being commanded by white officers and black non-commissioned officers. Um, of course, since the soldiers were black, they were thought low of by white officers, and they were not trained properly because white officers did not think that they would be able to fight as well as the white soldiers during the Civil War, um, which allowed them to, of course, not do as good as the white soldiers. Um, the black Union soldiers, they were captured by the Confederates, and they did receive harsher punishment, of course, than the white soldiers that were captured. You also need to know that the black soldiers were threatened by the Confederate Congress to be punished and enslaved if they were from the Union Army. This is a picture of the black units or black slaves during the Civil War. These black soldiers were a part of the Union Army. They probably were getting ready for training or getting ready to go to war on the firing lines.
The impact of African Americans during the Civil War was very essential. The Civil War proved the courage of African Americans because many people thought that because they were African American, they didn't have the same capabilities as the white soldiers, so they proved them wrong.
And that is the end of us teaching you about the African Americans during the Civil War.